When the tables turn, a story of resilience and redemption. What happens when a prestigious institution slams its doors on a brilliant young black student, telling him he doesn't fit their elite standards? David Carter stood outside the grand gates of Kingswood Academy, his acceptance letter clutched tightly in trembling hands. The elite private school's stone buildings rose behind wrought iron fences like monuments to privilege. Their windows glinted in the early autumn sunlight. For a 17-year-old boy from East Harlem, this scholarship wasn't just an opportunity, it was his chance to break a generational cycle, to prove himself on equal ground with those born into advantage, to make his family proud. That morning, his mother had ironed his only dress shirt 3 times in their small kitchen, her movements slow and careful, as if smoothing every wrinkle would somehow protect him. "Remember who you are," she whispered, straightening his tie with a gentle but firm grip. "No matter what they say in there." Those words echoed in David's mind as he took a deep breath, adjusted the second-hand blazer his cousin had lent him, one size too big but the best they could manage, and walked through the gates with determination burning in his chest. He was 3 hours early for his meeting with the scholarship committee, but punctuality was a value his grandfather had drilled into him. "If you're not early, you're late," Grandpa used to say, his voice heavy with wisdom and exhaustion after long shifts driving the city bus. David crossed the immaculate lawn toward Founders Hall, the admissions building. Polished mahogany and gleaming brass greeted him inside. Portraits of stern-faced men hung on the walls, generations of Kingswood's leadership, all of them white, most of them scowling. Their eyes seemed to follow him as he approached the receptionist's desk. A woman with silver hair glanced up, her professionally polite expression faltering for half a second when she took in David's appearance, the ill-fitting blazer, the scuffed shoes, his dark brown skin. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her tone wasn't openly hostile, but there was a coolness there. An invisible wall. "I'm David Carter," he replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "I have an appointment with the scholarship committee at 2 p.m. I'm early." She glanced at her computer screen. "Ah, yes, the diversity scholarship applicant," she said, just loud enough for 2 nearby faculty members to turn their heads. Their gazes lingered longer than necessary. David kept his expression neutral. He had practiced with that. "You'll have to wait elsewhere," she added. "Perhaps the library?" She gestured vaguely down the hall, already dismissing him as she returned her attention to the screen. David thanked her and followed the directions, his footsteps echoing on the marble floors. The hallways of Kingswood were lined with trophy cases, decades of rowing championships, debate medals, academic prizes. Names like Wentworth, Sterling, and Caldwell repeated across generations, suggesting dynasties of wealth and legacy. The library was a cathedral of knowledge, with stained glass windows and shelves that stretched forever. A librarian watched David with suspicion until he presented his acceptance letter. Only then did she nod, though her gaze remained wary. He found an empty table in the farthest corner. He spent hours there, reading Kingswood's history, its founding by railroad tycoon Benjamin Kingswood in 1868, its list of illustrious alumni, senators, CEOs, justices. The success stories were impressive, but as David flipped through the glossy view books, he noticed how carefully curated the diversity was in their photos. A black student here, an Asian student there, strategically placed like decorative accents. At 1:45 p.m., he returned to Founders Hall, his blazer now properly buttoned and his shoulders squared. The receptionist directed him to the 3rd floor without looking up. The scholarship committee sat behind an imposing oak table in a wood-paneled room. 5 people awaited him. At the center was Headmaster Charles Wentworth III, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. On his left sat Robert Sterling, board chair, and on his right was Victoria Alden, head of alumni relations. Only one face offered David any comfort: Dr. Naomi Ellis, head of the mathematics department and the only black faculty member on the committee. "Please, Mr. Carter, take a seat," Headmaster Wentworth said, gesturing to a solitary chair placed several feet from the table. The distance was not accidental. David sat, his hands folded carefully to hide the slight tremor. He had rehearsed for this moment countless times. His English teacher, Mrs. Ruiz, had said he was a shoo-in. "They'd be lucky to have you." But sitting here, across from these people, her confidence felt distant. Wentworth cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, your academic achievements are noteworthy." He shuffled through David's file, pausing at a page. A 4.0 GPA from East Harlem Public High School. He said the name like it was a diagnosis. "Thank you, sir," David replied evenly. "Hard work is admirable," Wentworth said with a tight smile. "But Kingswood requires excellence beyond grades. Our students are prepared for a certain rigor, socially and academically. It's different from what you may be accustomed to. The message was clear. You don't belong. Victoria Alden leaned forward. Your essay mentioned an interest in business and entrepreneurship? Her tone was neutral, but her eyes were evaluating. David nodded. Yes, ma'am. I started a tech support business in my neighborhood at 14. Last year, I expanded to web design for local businesses. I've saved over $3,000 toward college expenses. How industrious, she replied, as if commenting on a child's lemonade stand. But Kingswood's business program feeds directly into Ivy League networks. Many of our students already have connections to Fortune 500 companies. Robert Sterling adjusted his glasses. Networking is key here. Our alumni offer invaluable opportunities to those in the Kingswood family. David's stomach tightened. They weren't interested in his skills, just his absence from their world. I've built strong relationships with local business owners, David said calmly. Different networks, but no less valuable. Alden offered a practiced smile. Kingswood is about shared experiences, Mr. Carter. Our students attend the same summer camps, belong to the same clubs, vacation in the same places. These bonds matter. Dr. Ellis spoke at last. His SAT scores are in the top percentile. His recommendations describe him as intellectually gifted and a natural leader. These are the qualities Kingswood claims to value. Academic qualifications aren't in question, Wentworth said. It's about fit. That word again. Fit. David knew what it meant. It was a polite way of saying not one of us. I believe I can fit, David replied. I bring a perspective that can enrich this community. The committee exchanged glances. Then Alden added, there are additional costs beyond tuition, social events, international trips, proper attire. Have you considered how you'll manage these? I've saved $3,200 from my business, David answered. I plan to keep working while studying. The reaction was immediate. Sterling frowned. Wentworth sighed. Kingswood students don't usually hold jobs during the term. Our curriculum demands full attention. For the next 20 minutes, David answered questions that emphasized what he lacked, not what he offered. They asked about country club memberships he didn't have, internships he couldn't afford, and family names they didn't recognize. Finally, the interview ended. As David stood, Dr. Ellis caught his eye. She gave him a small nod, part sympathy, part encouragement. Outside the hall, she found him. You're exactly what this school needs, she whispered. But it may take time for Kingswood to realize that. 3 days later, David received the rejection letter. It was formal, polite, and devastating. He read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in the box with his other important papers. He allowed himself 10 minutes of grief, then reopened his laptop and started applying to other scholarships. This isn't the end, he told his mother. It's just a redirection. And it was. David accepted a full scholarship to Hudson State University, where he thrived. He met people from all backgrounds who didn't see his skin color as a novelty. He maintained a perfect GPA while expanding his business. By his sophomore year, he developed an inventory management algorithm that helped small businesses optimize their supply chains. With support from Dr. Lin, his computer science professor, David launched Carter Analytics. By graduation, he'd secured $5 million in venture capital. Within 3 years, his company was valued at over $100 million. David Carter, the boy Kingswood had dismissed, was now one of the most sought-after names in tech. At 26, David was a multimillionaire. He bought his mother a home, created scholarships for students from East Harlem, and launched an investment fund, Harlem Rising Ventures, focused on minority-owned businesses. At 30, his net worth surpassed $200 million. Forbes named him one of the most influential entrepreneurs of the decade. CNN called him the conscience of Silicon Valley. Then, Kingswood Academy emailed him. They were celebrating their 150th anniversary and reaching out to distinguished business leaders for donations. The message was signed by Victoria Alden. David almost ignored it. But curiosity won. He scheduled a visit. When he arrived at Kingswood in his Tesla, wearing a tailored suit, no one recognized him. He was given a grand tour and then pitched an opportunity to fund the Kingswood Innovation Center. The donation, $50 million. David listened patiently. Then he asked about scholarships, diversity, faculty representation. The answers were disappointing. He made an offer, $75 million, but with conditions. Legally binding quotas for student diversity, faculty hires, and financial aid. An incubator program for minority entrepreneurs. a dean of inclusion with real power. It took 3 months, but Kingswood agreed. On Founders Day, David stood on Kingswood's lawn. The unveiling wasn't the Carter Innovation Center. It was the Opportunity and Access Center. My donation comes with expectations, he said. Because education should be a bridge, not a gate. The crowd was stunned. Some angry, some inspired. But change had come to Kingswood. David's story reminds us that brilliance is everywhere, but opportunity isn't. He didn't seek revenge. He demanded transformation.